Thank you very much, Joe. And Admiral, thank you very much for all of your very forthright and visionary comments. I am introducing this morning Chris Connor, President and CEO of American Association of Port Authorities, and he is going to be our moderator. And he comes to us at a time of great change in the port industry with congestion that we are seeing all over our ports in the United States. Chris is the former global president and chief executive officer of Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics, one of the world's largest ocean car carriers. Mr. Connor has over 38 years of experience in international shipping and logistics and began his career at United States Lines. Gee, Chris, that's a long time ago. Followed by Crowley Maritime in 1987, prior to joining Wallenius in 1984. In addition to roles in the USA, Chris's career path brought him to Hong Kong, Taiwan, the Netherlands, and finally to Norway as CEO of WWL. Since September 2017, Mr. Connor has been a board member at the Pasha Group, and since 2018, chairman of the Business Advisory Group at XYLYX Bio. Chris, thank you very much for joining us. We welcome your participation and your vision of what has been a very, very tough and complex year for the maritime industry. Thank you very much.
Stas, thank you for that introduction, and thanks to the Propeller Club for inviting me to participate. And I applaud the Propeller Club for hosting this event, albeit in a virtual format. It's so important that we bring people together to discuss these critical issues that we're all faced with. What I'm going to do this morning, I'll make a few general comments kind of about the state of the affairs, so to speak, and then I'll introduce our four panelists today. And then each one of the panelists will make their own presentations with their own perspectives on the situation. And then we'll have a Q&A where audience participation is encouraged via the chat box, and I'll relay those questions to the panelists. But absolutely, Stas, the port industry is no longer relegated to page 17 of the newspaper. We are on page 1, and we're the lead news story on nightly television news. Like many of you, I'm sure you're experiencing, I have neighbors and friends now who suddenly, after years not really caring much about what I did, are really, really interested in what's happening. And they want to know what's happening with the ports, what's all about the congestion. I think most people on this call realize that this is not a port issue alone. In fact, I would argue that ports are a symptom and not the cause, but rather there has been a significant confluence of complicated events and actors resulting in this epic volume increase that's arriving at our ports and resulting in the log jams that we're all experiencing. Today in Washington, D.C., President Biden will be holding a press conference where he's going to leverage the recently created supply chain task force, as well as the appointment of former Obama administration official and former Maryland Secretary of Transportation, John Porcari, and convene port leaders, including Mario Cordero from Long Beach and Gene Soroka from Los Angeles, as well as major retailers, organized laborers, and representatives of other transportation modes, where reportedly commitments will be made about potential actions that can be taken across the chain to loosen up the congestion. I think this is an important first step. It will surely not be the only solution. I think this will be a multiplier effect over time, but I think it's important that all the transportation modes come together, as well as the users of the transportation system come together in a more meaningful way than we've been able to up to now. So with that as an intro, to discuss their perspectives on this and other matters surrounding congestion, let me introduce our four panelists today. Our first panelist is Ed McCarthy. Ed is the Chief Operating Officer of the Georgia Ports Authority. He is responsible for sustaining and growth development of GPA's operations while maintaining world-class operating standards. His direct reports include the Directors of Engineering and Facilities Maintenance, IT, Equipment Maintenance, and Crane and Ship Shore Operations, Container Operations, Break Bulk and Bulk Operations, and the Director of Protective Services. Mr. McCarthy came to the job at GPA from CMA CGM America, where he was the Chief Operating Officer. He is a graduate of the Maritime College of the State University of New York, has a diploma in terminal management from Lloyd's Maritime Academy at Kent College in the UK, and a master's in business administration from William and Mary University Mason School of Business. Our second panelist is Kees Van Pelt. Kees is the Short Sea Terminals Special Project Manager at Rotterdam Short Sea Terminals. This is a position he has held for the last 17 years. Prior to joining Rotterdam Short Sea Terminals, Mr. Van Pelt worked for Bell Lines. He is a native of Holland and a graduate of Avans University. Our third panelist is Rick Clark. Rick is the Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer of the Alabama State Port Authority of Mobile. He has over 30 years of maritime experience. He began his career at Cooper T. Smith prior to joining Puerto Rico Marine Management. Most recently, prior to joining the Port of Alabama, he served as the interim COO of GTUSA Wilmington and U.S. Manager of Operations for GTUSA LLC, which is a subsidiary of Gulf Tanner, an independent port management and 3PL based in the United Arab Emirates. Rick is a native of Mobile, a graduate of Trinity Southern University, and attended the University of South Alabama in Mobile, as well as the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. And last but not least, our fourth and final panelist is Ed DeNike. He is the president of SSA Containers, and he has over 50 years experience in the terminal and stevedore management operations. He is the president of the company's domestic container operations and also serves as Chief Operating Officer of SSA Terminals. In 2018, Mr. DeNike received the Connie Award given by the Containerization and Intermodal, which is based on the influence and contribution to the containerization and intermodal industry. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are our four panelists. And I'd like to now turn it over to Mr. Ed McCarthy. Ed, the floor is yours, sir.
Chris, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here for the presentation. Hopefully you can all see that now. Well, Chris, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you to the Propeller Club for letting the Georgia Port Authority participate and share our thoughts on how the COVID-19 has affected or rippled through the supply chain. There's really been a wave of issues that have gone through the supply chain. Hang on one second, make sure there we go. That's just a picture of Georgia ports. And as Chris alluded to already, there's been a lot of headlines in the news, most recently this morning, about what's being done in LA Long Beach to try and work 24 hours a day out there for the West Coast. And what I'm going to cover really is, from a national perspective, the issues that are impacting the country, the last 15 months, what's going on in the South Atlantic here, the impacts down here, and then finally some solutions that we're working on here in Georgia and the South Atlantic region to try and mitigate the vessels at anchor and really the entire supply chain impact. Issues, what stemmed 15 months ago when COVID first broke out. We all basically, in March of 2020, we huddled in our homes and we started ordering everything online. So if you look at the supply chain, it was really designed to go to the store, and then the 300 million population of the US go to the store, pick up things and take it home. It was in the single digits how much cargo or deliveries were going to the door. And now it's in the double digits, close to the 20 percentile nationally of what's going to the door. So the supermarkets shelves are, they've had to shift from supermarket and how do we deliver that right to everyone's door. And the infrastructure was not there, whether that was the Amazon, the FedEx, UPS, post office, or FedEx delivery trucks wasn't really there. What it impacted next was the short delivery to those fulfillment centers or to the warehouses out to the door. So we started to see a shortage of truckers, and some of those truckers, you can read in the news, actually shifted from long haul trucking or even port drayage into the delivery service because there was less impact on liability issues for them as an individual owner operator. What eventually then impacted was the labor in the warehouse. Basically, all of this cargo going to fulfillment centers, e-commerce, and warehouses and distribution centers. There wasn't enough labor, and a lot of people were staying at home, and we couldn't fulfill the orders of getting it to the stores. What the next impact was is those warehouses, you can see the containers stacking up outside the warehouses. So not only were the inside of the warehouses getting congested because they didn't have enough of a workforce, the containers started dwelling outside of those facilities, and containers all around the country started slowing up the delivery into those warehouses. How did that impact the chassis nationally? Basically, all of the chassis nationally have been utilized because they're now under a container that is waiting to be unloaded at a warehouse. So the warehouses are being used as what they're made for, warehousing, but now the containers are being used as warehousing, and the chassis becomes a shortage of supply and chassis because they're being utilized underneath of the containers. And what does that lead to is the ports don't have the chassis to deliver the cargo out to the warehouses. So the ports end up looking like a warehouse. And then the last link in the chain is the vessel. And that's what you're seeing now in the news. So this didn't start in the last 3 months or 4 months, as you've seen in the news. This really started 14 months ago, probably July, when the surge of cargo started to come back to meet the e-commerce demand at the door. So the last piece of supply chain is the vessels, and we're starting to see those vessels back up because there's not enough fluidity of getting the cargo out of the ports and onto into the warehouses and finally into the store at the front door. Chris, I stole this from your presentation from the AAP, but this is a more detailed explanation. I'm not going to read all this, but this is a more detailed explanation of the backlog and the impact on the supply chain, port workers, and the volatility of the supply chain. So at the Port of Savannah or in the South Atlantic region, what are we seeing in the supply chain? So if you look back to January 2020, the number of containers coming through the Port of Savannah was just about 200,000 containers, just peaking over 200,000 containers after that peak season in 2019. And when COVID hit in March, you see we lost about 15 to 20% in volume during that time period. But the bounce back didn't just bounce back a little. The surge of supply, not only to meet the e-commerce demand to the door, but to try and backfill the storefronts, was a tremendous surge. We've grown year over year from 2020 to 2021 by 20%, 23% in the last 20 months here in the South Atlantic region. Compounding that is, if you look at the number of empties, that top blue line, the number of empties that have been on terminal have stayed relatively static, but the dwell time of containers on terminal for empties have been relatively static as well. 15 days, now up to about 17 days. The exports, the green line, has been between about 5 days and it's grown to about 7 days, so a modest increase. But the blue line of imports that have been stacking up at terminals, we've gone from about 13,000 imports on terminal to above 30,000 imports on terminal, but the dwell has grown from about 3 to 4 days up to 10 days. So even though our volume's only grown by 23% year over year, the amount of dwell on terminal has grown by 140%. And you can see that cascading backlog into the supply chain. I talked about chassis a few minutes ago. 20 months ago, the amount of chassis that were utilized in the Savannah region or in the South Atlantic region was 70% of the 60,000 chassis were being utilized. In the Savannah region alone, there were 18 to 19,000 chassis just in the Savannah local region. Now we're at, and 70% of those 18% of those 18,000 were being utilized. So only about 14,000 chassis. Now the full 60,000 chassis are being utilized 100% of the time. And the blue line, this is the number of days that a chassis is being from consolidated chassis management being utilized on the street. It's more than doubled on the street. So they're sitting at the warehouses out there on the street for 15 or more days now. Supply chain solutions, some of the things that we need to look at nationally is, how do we convert the truck dray to rail? I know that may not be palatable to everyone, but really, how do we make it more short haul trucking instead of long haul trucking? There's containers that come into Savannah that go all the way up into North Carolina, Tennessee, that are being trucked. How do we better utilize rail to have a more fluid infrastructure? Because right now, rail in the South Atlantic region is underutilized. There have been spot issues, primarily due to chassis, but there's a tremendous amount of capacity with both CSX and Norfolk Southern on the rail. Off-dock grounded areas in some of these locations where you move to make that short haul truck, how do we make off-dock grounded locations both locally around ports or even in large cities like Atlanta, Chattanooga, Huntsville, Charlotte? Building more warehouses. We are building more warehouses here locally. I'll show that here in a second. And then speed to the trucking community. How do we do a better job of getting the containers delivered more readily? So what are the solutions? Some of the things that the Georgia Port Authority and the state of Georgia is working on right now. So most recently, we've added gate hours. We used to be Monday to Friday, 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 at night. And then Saturdays, 8 to 5. We're now Monday to Saturday, 6 to 6, and gate hours at night, 1900 to 2300. The state of Georgia, the governor here, has relaxed the hours of service for the trucking community to help them utilize some of these night gate hours. Workforce, we started this about 3 years ago. Workforce development, we have high school students that are being trained in forklifts, jockey trucks, empty equipment to be long-term employees of the port here in Savannah. So developing them right out of high school, those who are not destined to college, and that's worked out really well for us. We have a great team of people. We actually have now one that in 3 years has become a crane operator. So a great story there. And then enhancements. I'll go over some pictures of what we're doing here to expand the facilities. Outside of our gates, currently in the Savannah area, 5 years ago when I arrived here, there were about 45 million square feet of warehouse space. In the past 5 years, the warehousing community has doubled the capacity here to 90 million square feet in a 30-mile radius. And there's another 50 million square feet of warehouse space that could be built, of which 10 million of that is under construction right now.